so I can record this because everybody is going to be asking me for a recording of Mike Laven here. So I've started that recording, but I'm going to start out here also with a couple of polls that I would like you to
I'll be there in a few minutes.
answer. Oh, and you know what? I'm going to, hang on a second here. I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody too. If you have something to say that you want everybody to hear, go ahead and unmute yourself. But I'm going to mute you right now. All right. And I have a few polls here that we're going to do today. And here is the first poll. When you're out in a public place, do you wear a mask? It's multiple choice. Yes, no, yes, but only if I cannot properly socially distance myself, or only on Halloween.
John, multiple spellings on where too, I see.
Multiple spellings on where? Oh, yes, yes. Do you wear a mask? Yes. Thank you so much for pointing that out, Sharon. I appreciate that. It's obviously W-E-A-R. I hope I didn't confuse you. All right. I'll give you just a couple more seconds to finish that poll.
I figured since you were talking about a place, where spelled that way is probably right.
I'm surprised I didn't spell mask, M-A-S-Q-U-E, or something like that, which is kind of like a mosque, but a mask instead. All right, I'm going to end this polling and share the results. We have 25 out of the 35 people who say that yes, they do wear a mask, 3 that say no, they don't, and 7 if they can't socially distance. And nobody wears a mask only on Halloween. So, all right, so there's our first poll. I'm going to stop sharing those results. And I have a second poll for you. This is especially for Mr. Laven to get a little more information before tonight's meeting as far as what Kiwanis thinks. Do you believe the city of Mankato should require mask wearing in public places? Those of you that are interested, and I think a lot of people will be interested, you can go on the City of Mankato website to join the meeting tonight, which is at 6 o'clock, where that is going to be discussed and will be held in a public forum. Okay, I'm going to end the polling on this one and share the results. 26 out of 36 people that took the poll say that the city should require mask wearing in public places, and 10 said no. All right, stop sharing those results. Go to our next poll. How many masks do you personally have in your possession? Do not include catchers or Halloween masks. You can go from 0 up to, what is the top one? More than 7. All right. Give you just another second on that one. I'll share the results on that. You can see 3 is the biggest answer. 11 people have 3 masks. Nobody has none, so everybody apparently has some kind of mask of those that answered. And you can also see that 9 people have more than 7 masks. Okay, interesting. I have just one more poll. Which one of these most applies to you? When I wear a mask, I'm better looking? Or is it I realize how bad my breath is? Or I'm glad I'm not a surgeon? Or I like to joke with bank tellers and tell them to put all the money in the bag. To make it even funnier, I bring a bag for them to use. Some of you people are thinking way too hard on this one. I know this is such a contentious thing for so many people. I thought I'd just end it with a little bit of humor. So, all right. I know you're all just dying to see how everybody voted on this one, so I'll go ahead and share it with you. 12 of you think you're better looking when you wear a mask. I don't know which ones of you that is, but I couldn't agree more or agree less depending upon who said that. Realize how bad my breath is? I tell you what, if by noon each day, if I say, man, this thing stinks, and then I realize it's because of me. I'm glad I'm not a surgeon, the number one answer. And some of you enjoy going into the bank. So I'm going to stop sharing those results now. And with that, let's go ahead and do our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, that brings us to our invocation. And our invocation today is from Paul Peterson.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Please join me. Dear Lord, we are thankful for this day that you have given us, for its blessings, its opportunities, and its challenges. May we appreciate and use each day that comes to us. We pray for strength and guidance for each day as it comes, for each day's duties, for each day's problems. May we be challenged to give our best always, and may we be assured of your presence with us. Amen.
Thank you, Paul. Doc, what do you got for us today?
Well, let's see. I've got a piece kind of honoring the 4th of July. It's one everybody knows, so I hope you all sing along. It's the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
All right.
My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is tramping out the vision where the great command Lord. He has loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. One more time in the chorus. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. His truth is marching on.
All right. Thank you, Doc. Thank you for that inspirational song. I feel sorry for all you guys. I muted myself. I sounded really good. But you just have to believe that, all right?
I
Okay.
just hope I did.
No, you sounded great, Doc. Fantastic. Thank you. Do we have any guests today? Any guests joining us? Vicki.
Hi, I have Bonnie Danbury, who is my executive director, and I have Dana Sandmeyer, who is an intern from South Central College.
All right, welcome Bonnie and Dana. Thank you for being with us today. And Vicki, thank you very much for bringing them here today. Bonnie and Dana, I want to let you know we're always looking for new members in Kiwanis. We don't always have this much fun. Sometimes we have a lot less. So anyway, we invite you, if you like what you see today, and to think about joining our club at some point. That would be absolutely great to have you on board. Any other guests today? Okay, those are our guests. Again, welcome Bonnie and Dana. Club announcements. Do we have any club announcements today?
Hey, John, this is Liz, your service chair. We have open invocation dates in the chat for August, so we're about a month out, but would love for some folks to take the invocation. It is not too difficult, I promise. And I hope everyone enjoyed the holiday this weekend, which is, of course, the Hamilton drop on Disney+.
All right. Thank you, Liz. So if you can go out to the chat, if you could sign up for one of those dates in August, that'd be great to have someone take the invocation. Other club announcements. All right. With that, good news. Anybody have good news? Sharon.
So my good news, if you can see this, you probably can't read this though, it says thank you. Back a couple of weeks ago, Laura Stevenson led our group on volunteers to write to Action Club members and also to write a note to graduating Key Club members. And so this was sent to me. However, it's really to all of you. So I'm going to read it to you. Thank you for remembering me on my special day. I will never forget my Key Club family and the never-ending support from you and the Kiwanis Club. I greatly appreciate your kindness. Caitlin Junie. So, you know, I just have to say with this, what a wonderful young lady she is for sending this. But, you know, what we do does make a difference with these kids. And I also am so grateful to Laura Stevens for having led the charge on this. It's a big deal. So thank you.
Yeah, that was absolutely wonderful. You know, we sent the notes to the graduates who didn't get to actually go through a graduation. We sent it to the people from Action Club Theater that didn't get to do their performance, and we put the call out there to the club, and we needed about 40 notes written, and all 40 of those notes got written. So thank you to all of you who did that. That's what a service club's all about, and I really appreciate that. Other good news. I have some good news, and it might seem a little odd to call this good news. Some of you may have seen this in the chat room, and the good news is that when someone has a tough time and they're going through a tough time, it's good to belong to a club like Kiwanis that can support you through those hard times. And some of you may have seen that Amy Jo lost her mother last week. And Amy Jo, we're so sorry to hear about that, but we just want you to know that we're all here to support you and your Action Club friends and everything and whatever goes on in your life. And we want to wish you the best moving forward and know that, you know, you're going to miss your mom like we all do. And we miss our moms too. And just know that we're here for you. All right. Okay. All right. My other good news is I got to spend time with two of my grandsons in my front yard. They went swimming in the little 30-gallon swimming pool in my front yard this last weekend. We socially distanced and I got to watch them swim, and it was so much fun. So that was a great time for me. I want to thank Matt for bringing his son Jacob over to our house, and we really enjoyed that and everything. So what other good news do we have?
Hey, John, Matt Brozick here. The kind of interesting news, not quite as interesting maybe as it will be soon, but Lisa, my wife, and I, as some of you I believe know, that we're expecting our fourth child, and as of right now, she was at the doctor this morning for a checkup, so I would say highly likely by next Monday's meeting, there'll be Brozick number 4 child to announce. So everybody, that'll really raise the attendance for next week's meeting. So just because that'll most likely be the announcement. So I was going to throw that out there.
All right, congratulations, Matt. I thought what you were going to say is the good news for the whole club is that your camera's not working.
Well, you know, it's I should put my mask on so I look a little bit better.
Say, Matt, this is Mike. I wanted to remind you, babies are not a catch and release program. So
Hey, well, actually, believe it or not, we've been doing a decent amount of fishing, and my son caught a 34.5-inch northern the other day, my 7-year-old. So that was really fun too. That's another piece of good news. So yeah, I have learned that you can release fish. Releasing children is a little more difficult.
Do you think, Matt, do you think that a good middle name would be Sturgeon?
You know, I haven't brought that up again to Lisa yet, but I will do that. I will say the president right now, John Kine, told me that I have to do that. See what she says.
Steven Sturgeon Brozick. I love it. I think it's great. I think that's what you should do. Just give me credit for it, all right? That sounds
Absolutely.
good.
I'll make
All
sure
right.
I put that in the newsletter or something.
There you go. Steven Sturgeon. Love it. Any other good news? If there is no further good news, I'm going to have Mr. Lagerquist introduce our speaker for the day.
All right, thank you, John, and thank you everybody for making it on this post-holiday meeting. But yes, I thought speaking with Mike Laven from the Mankato City Council would be a good opportunity to cover a lot of bases. You know, we've got all kinds of activities happening with COVID and the budget process. We've also got the recent announcement that Pat Hentges, longtime city manager, will be leaving soon. And of course, tonight's big meeting about the mask ordinance. So Mike has been a long-time city councilman. He's got 16 years under his belt. So thank you, Mike, for all of that. And if you've ever spoken with Mike, you know that he doesn't do this because he feels that it's an obligation. He really is interested in trying to help. He gets inside the numbers, he gets inside the information, and he is very literate on everything that comes before the Mankato City Council. So without any further introduction, let's give a big Kiwanis welcome to the City Councilman Mike Laven.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, I will start out quickly to just to recap, and it's nice to see a lot of familiar faces because that makes me feel like I'm an adult. Every once in a while, I don't think I'm an adult, but it's nice to say, oh, I know these people, and as a tribute to Kiwanis, definitely to have this type of leadership across the community. When I first got elected in the year 2000, I was one of those people that kind of said, well, I don't want to sit on the bar stool or the couch and tell everybody how it should be done. I should be involved somehow. And I had that opportunity and was elected. I served 3 terms, 4 years each until 2012. In 2008, a gentleman by the name of Chris Frederick ran against me. And I won my 2008 race to serve till 2012 by 51% of the vote to his 49. And it boiled down to I door knocked 9 more precincts than he did the weekend before the election, and that was the difference in the race. Fast forward to 2012, Chris door knocked 11 more precincts than I did the weekend before the election, and he won 51% to 49%. Even moving again to 2016, Chris and I are battling it out for a third round. Not quite the Thrilla in Manila, but Chris moved out of town, literally and figuratively. He and his wife had an opportunity to build outside the city proper, so he wasn't going to be able to continue serving. So even though he had filed to run, that came up at the end, and so he, in essence, quasi withdrew. But I still campaigned. So now this coming fall, for the first time ever, I have no one running against me. Although I would say apathy is an incredibly hard thing to overcome. As my 4-year cycle parallels the President of the United States, lots of people do vote, but voter fatigue and apathy kind of kicks in. There's usually about a 5 to almost 5,300 vote drop from the federal races down to the local races on the local level. So I've said this time and time again, every vote does matter. Because, you know, as tonight is an example, we're making a decision in our community that impacts everyone that the federal level can't do because of the Constitution and state rights. The state of Minnesota will struggle with that issue of what they should and shouldn't do. But our community has asked us to look at this issue and make a decision on it. And that's what we're doing. You know, to my left here, I've got the annual city budget. I've got the updated projections related to how things have changed since COVID started. So I can certainly handle any questions you have in general. And it's interesting because with tonight's vote, it will not be unanimous. Very similar to the polls that John had here. There's not unanimous agreement on whether or not the city of Mankato should mandate masks. And that's fine. I think that's a healthy discussion we're having. That's why I felt comfortable saying we needed to have a public discussion about it. Some of my colleagues didn't agree with that, and that's fine. I mean, they were representing their views and the people that have told them that, and that's where we're at. You know, I would not venture a guess on how it's going to end up tonight. It may pass, it may not. Because we're under emergency orders, the ordinance is under an emergency order ordinance requirement, which requires a 5-vote affirmative versus a simple majority. So we need 5 members of the council to agree to move this ordinance into reality. If that does not happen, if only 4 of us, or again less than 5, the motion will fail. We would have one other potential, would be to offer a ordinance in a non-emergency context, and we could, in essence, have a 30-day public hearing, or excuse me, 30-day notice for a public hearing, and then that would institute an ordinance going into effect if it were to pass 30 days later. I'm not a scientist, but all of the information I've read well before this last 2 weeks, as well as into the future, is that the coronavirus is not going to go away in a very short time period. It's going to be around into 2021. So there would be some reason to consider this ordinance on a broader scale. Under an emergency ordinance scenario, we would have to renew this before 61 days, or else it then goes off the books. So what we're looking at potentially is renewing this on a every 61-day cycle under an emergency ordinance context. So a non-emergency context, it would stay on the books until rescinded from the council. Again, there's some people that believe because the virus is going to be in our community for a period of time longer than a 61-day timeline, there may be some rationale to consider a non-emergency ordinance. But that's the kind of, depending on what happens tonight. I don't want to call that foreshadowing, but that may be where we end up after tonight's vote. Again, I can't say how some of my colleagues who have not supported this process yet, they maybe have changed their mind, have looked at some more data, had heard from constituents. The poll that you gave earlier, John, about 72% of the people in the group said that they support it, 28% not. That's kind of how most of the emails, the text messages, and phone calls are going that I'm receiving. There lots of folks support wearing a mask. They think the city should be engaged in that process because they're going off of that visual cue when they're out in the community that people are not wearing masks that often and they're getting closer than 6 feet to each other. And you know, if we look in a broad context here in Minnesota, our healthcare facilities, our meatpacking plants, and our bars and restaurants where people are congregating closely together are where we're having the increased case loads. And so can masks help prevent that spread? That's where we were at. There's certainly a lot of science. I know I've had probably maybe close to 150 emails that have linked the Dr. Ulsterholm podcast from June 12th to me to talk about what masks can do and not do. And again, I've watched that a handful of times since June, and his references are more about masks protecting you from getting the virus. And again, I respect him. As a kid who grew up here and an adult, I remember as Mankato dealt with the meningitis outbreak. Dr. Ulsterholm was in charge of the state's epidemiologist. There we go. So I'm familiar with his work and the credibility. And again, his reference in that podcast is about protecting yourself from getting the virus. He does very little to address wearing a mask to prevent the spread. And I think that is a distinction that needs to be made, because our ordinance is about preventing the spread of the virus, not saving you from getting the virus. That's not the sense of security you should be looking for. And so that's kind of where we're at in a nutshell. And yes, Mr. Hentges is leaving. He was kind enough to agree to, we asked him last year to stay one additional year. And so I don't think anyone would have foreseen a global pandemic. But we know that the pool of candidates that we're going to review are under the same rules of engagement, so to speak, when it comes to their jobs that they're currently holding across the country. So they won't be able to come in with a silver bullet and say, well, this is how we'll take care of a community post-pandemic. We have a lot of things going for us in Mankato. We've got an incredibly diverse economy. We're not reliant on one particular industry, so we can certainly kind of weather the storm. We saw that in 2008 as the housing market changed. Certainly there was some economic changes, but as Greater Mankato Growth has rightfully promoted and trumpeted, that we've got both job growth, economic growth on individual pay, and we've had population growth that entire time. So we've been doing a lot of things right, so that we anticipate a very robust process of candidates coming to the community as we narrow that field down. And so we look forward to that. It's been interesting. In my conversations prior, last November, I was in San Antonio for a National League of Cities conference, and I was talking to elected leaders and administrators around the country. There's about 7,000 or 8,000 of us there in San Antonio from across the country. And they were talking about, as I asked the question, we're about to go through the process of hiring a new city manager, second one in almost 50 years. What's the landscape like in today's world? And the pessimists were saying, well, most city managers last 4 or 5 years because councils don't put up with it and they get them out of there quick, or they don't like the job and they leave. The realist was, if your community is attractive and stable, both not just in the government sense, but the community as a whole is moving towards initiatives and goals, that's very attractive to people who want to grow and flourish in their profession. And I felt comforted by that, because I said, wow, let's see, we have Envision 2020. We've got a variety of groups in this community that all pull together, whether they be public, private, nonprofit. This makes a lot of sense. We're going to do okay. So I anticipate we'll end up with a candidate that, and someone that accepts a job offer that will be a good fit for Mankato, not just in the near term, but the long term. And in classic move, I'll say I'll shut up and listen. I'm open to questions, because that's always the best part of these things. So,
Mike,
Question for Mike.
go ahead.
I was just saying questions for Mike. So you go ahead.
So, Mike, one of the things I was wondering, given numbers in Minnesota overall are trending down, but we have been a rather hot spot for the state. Is there anything beyond the mask ordinance that we are looking at to help increase testing in the area, or education for, particularly this hotspot seems to be younger than a lot of the other areas, and increasing awareness and testing in the city?
sure, great question. We're certainly paying close attention to what's happening both with Male Health Systems, the Mankato Clinic, and the county. We've been in a emergency operations mode with the county since March, and so we're certainly making sure that we're all hearing the same data and also looking at those numbers as they come and go. We're not, I know I'm not, and I should put a giant asterisk in front of this. This is my opinion. It may not be the representative of the Mankato City Council. So at any time, anything I say could or could not be construed as an opinion appropriate for the city of Mankato. Okay, that being said, the reality is that university population, both at Minnesota State University, Rasmussen, and Bethany are coming back into Mankato this August. And so if we have some operational pieces like a mask ordinance in place and the community is in sync with that, or we could certainly have an easier time of abiding by that. That said, a good colleague of mine in the world of city government is in Boulder, Colorado, and they're struggling with the university campus population, particularly in the fraternities and sororities, having parties and not masking, and certainly not social distancing. And that's where the uprise in Boulder is in that 18 to 25 range. And that is a tough one, very tough, Liz. How do you get those folks to pay attention? But I think some of them are starting to realize that, oh, we can get this. And it may only knock us down for a day or two, or it may make we only have these symptoms and et cetera, et cetera. But I think the reality is for some of them, they're starting to realize that this is, it's not just an old person getting sick thing. So.
All right, Mike Lagerquist here. Just wondering, what are the thoughts as far as enforcement? I worked at MSU when they imposed the smoking ban on campus and said, if you see somebody who's smoking, you tell them to stop that. And it, as you might imagine, it was not terribly effective. I'm just wondering, because people who want to do that or, you know, don't want to do that will do that.
Sure. Well, you know, and I will kind of refer to what we've done in the past. In 2006, Mankato led the area in banning the smoking in bars and restaurants, indoor smoking. We were 2 years ahead of the state. We were, I think, at the time, the 10th city in the state of Minnesota to do that. Moose Lake was the very first city. So, you know, when a metropolis like Moose Lake is leading the state, we all will follow. And I love the town. But the reality is that we heard from the business owners, how are they going to enforce this? What are they going to be responsible for? How will this work? And it kind of boiled down to the city created some signage that said, here's the city ordinance related to indoor smoking, and it's prohibited in this facility. I know I've asked the public safety folks to provide data, tell me how many people we arrested and cited, they came back with, we didn't arrest or cite anyone. They said we had several conversations in that first 7 to 10 days with a few business owners to understand that their role, because they were unsure if they had to be the police or if they had to just make sure that people knew. We had several conversations with folks who were passionate about, they felt this was a restriction of their freedom and right. Most of those conversations happened outside the business place. And again, they were heard, but those folks, it was an education piece. And that's part of the ordinance already, is there's the warning, both either verbal and or written, that comes into play first before any civil penalty or criminal penalty that would come into play. So some of that, by statute, an ordinance has to be written to have either administrative and or criminal components attached to it for enforcement. So it looks horrible to say $1,000 and 90 days in jail, but in reality, the words "up to" are always in front of that. You know, I would liken this. I suspect if someone became belligerent, that they would be more than likely. And I just give an example. If someone's at Old Navy refusing to wear a mask after being told of the ordinance and the staff there is flustered, the business could cite them for trespassing for failure to follow the rules. Again, some people in this group are old enough to remember prior to no shirt, no shoes. Some of them are old enough, including myself, to know that we used to stuff all those seatbelts in the backseat of the car underneath the seat because they were getting in the way when we sat back there. You know, there's a betterment and again, a public health benefit to some of these things that come into play. And I think that's where we're at with in the terms of masks. Did I just telegraph my vote? I'm sorry. Did I just telegraph my?
You've been telegraphing your vote for 6 weeks. What are you talking about?
Thank you, thank you.
Mike, this is
Yes.
Jim Armbruster. I have a question about tonight's meeting. Is tonight's meeting just restricted to taking input and then voting on it? Or let's say when you do vote on it, there is not a supermajority of 5-2, it's 4-3 or something else. Is it possible then that someone could introduce a new resolution like you talked about initially, that would be a non-emergency order that would be voted on in 30 days. Is there any support for that, or is the council likely just to wait to see what the state does?
A little bit of all of the above, Jim. Because this is an emergency order, we can actually offer amendments to change the language. And I'll give you a hypothetical. We could remove the guidelines we laid out are from the CDC related to those 2 and above wearing masks recommended. We could change that age to 12 or 18 tonight. We could make that amendment to the resolution, and it could be and then voted on, of course, procedurally, and we could do that. And then in turn, as you mentioned, and I did earlier, that if this were to fail and not hit that super majority of 5 votes, a council member could have a move to adjourn. A council member could offer a motion. A non-emergency ordinance does require notice of the public 30 days. And that's what makes this a reality is that, and I know in the 16 years I've been in the council, there's been 1 or 2 instances where we've been in a meeting and realized based on what we were talking about that we needed to get the public input, and we would call a public hearing in 30 days. And so we would be in the early part of August that there would be a public hearing. And then in the event, if, and I say that huge, if that were to pass, then with 30 days, it would go into effect. So it would be September. So it's a little bit of all that in play. Again, I'm somewhat intrigued to find out how my colleagues who have not supported this, and again, that's very, very normal. I'm comfortable with them not always agreeing, because I think that's better for us as a community. If some of them have changed their mind based on the information they have read. Some of the changes to the language we put in to help people understand. There was concern from the daycare providers in town, but we explained to them that no, you're exempt because you're considered an essential business under the governor's orders, and they're taking care of first responders' children, so they will not be required to have masks on children at daycares. Also, there's some clarification with the fitness and gyms. They were worried that people would be going in a respiratory arrest by wearing a mask. And we clarified that it's when the people enter, but when they're under that strenuous activity based on medical conditions, absolutely they can remove the mask if they're working out on equipment or in a class that's a high aerobic nature, so to speak. And so those things. I did find it interesting that I've been watching some of the video from the Twins preseason as they're getting started at Target Field, and several of the players are wearing masks when they're out on the field or close to each other. And I kind of think, boy, if a finely tuned athlete is still wearing a mask and performing, maybe a guy like me that needs to lose a little weight and could probably wear a mask too. And then also the Free Press, I felt, did a little bit have a job on the headline saying that we're exempting bars. We're not exempting bars in this. When you enter a bar or a restaurant, you have to have your mask on. When you're seated at a table and you're eating and drinking, you can take your mask off. You're not going to be allowed to go to the bar and order food or drinks. You're not going to be able to stand in the middle of a bar or restaurant and congregate with your friends, because that's not allowed. And even if you are going to try to do that, you have to have your mask on. If you get up to use the bathroom, you have to have your mask on. When you leave the bar and restaurant, you have your mask on. But when you're eating and drinking, again, we put that in place because there's some people who were distraught that they were going to be forced to close their business because we wouldn't let people come in and wear their mask while they ate and drank. And again, you don't have to wear your mask when you're eating and drinking. That's the practicality of it, but that's also that's clearly defined in the ordinance, so folks don't have any misunderstanding.
Say, Mike, you said 2 and above wearing a mask. It's actually 3 and above, right?
Yes, you're
Three
right,
and above,
absolutely.
right.
Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, I you know, for part of me, I think back to when our daughter was that age and we were teaching her the cover your cough, cover your sneeze, wash your hands afterwards, and that's a challenge. I know it comes back in karma because at age 14, I start to yawn and she's on me for not covering my mouth and I'm not even fully yawned yet. So I know that that's all the part of a parent that goes through all of us. But by no means are we going to be, arresting 9-year-olds because they had their mask off as they coughed or sneezed or were out and mom didn't notice or dad didn't notice. There's a lot of opportunity to engage the people in that matter. And it won't just be our police department that will have that ability to look at those folks and issues. Our public safety as a whole, as well as community development. There's an obligation that all those folks pay attention to the ordinances as they're part of their job. So,
Mike, along the same lines, and maybe this is a question for Paul too, would this ordinance follow to the MAPS district, or would that they need to do their own piece of recommendation for school for the fall?
we do have a provision in there related to educational institutions and the expectation of what they do. And I think Paul can address from the operational business side, but I know Minnesota State University is exempt because they are a state facility and they fall under state jurisdiction. For instance, all the building that's going on up at the university, they pay the city of Mankato building permit fee for that, but we don't review the designs and we don't review, that's all the state. So some of that is out of our hands and that's recognized in the ordinance. But Paul, I think, can address it way better.
Paul had to leave, I believe, so he's not he's not in the meeting anymore.
Well, who cares what the school district wants to do?
Mike, what about outdoor spaces?
The outdoor spaces, it's when you're out and about walking down the sidewalk by yourself, you're not required to wear a mask. But when you get into that engagement, when you start to approach that 6-foot window, and I know even the CDC has started to push that back to 10 feet. The reality is that this isn't to provide a sense of security that isn't there. This really is about you. Again, this has been true since the very beginning. The science says that you don't know you have the virus when you have the virus. And so your symptoms may be so mild you're not aware of it, but you could be spreading it. And I have some good friends that gave an example of what they did in New York, and it was they used examples of people not coughing on themselves, and that was but just the idea that if you can spread a lot of things if you don't pay attention to each other.
So Mike, I have a couple of.
Kathy, you just muted yourself.
Sorry, I'd like you to speak for a minute to public safety. Both the kinds of conversations that have been begun in communities across the country regarding police and public safety reform because of George Floyd's death, and the ways in which you think our budget challenges will affect public safety broadly and in particular.
Great question, Kathy. Yes, and that's where like, and I'll reference this ordinance first, is that we're, again, going off our experience both with the abandoned indoor smoking and even tobacco 21, the conversations that occur with the business community already on ordinances is there, and our public safety folks have engaged in that, as well as our community development folks. So again, we're not anticipating a massive problem. I know there's going to be people who feel this is right up there with all the other constitutional rights, and they are probably, there's going to be a little bit more of a engagement / confrontation initially, but I think if all the people who claim that they're never going to shop in Mankato again really did that, we won't have a problem because they're the ones allegedly not wearing a mask. All the people that are wearing a mask seem to be okay. But I think that's a bigger challenge. Now, as related to the budget and a bigger picture, I mean, the public safety, the police component is a little over $8 million in our budget. So it's a significant part. Most of that is personnel. But as we have had in our city budget for the last 3 years, body cameras. And the reason we haven't done that is because there is no best practice gold standard mandate from either a state or federal level of what that should look like. And it relates to from the simple things of when the camera's on to the data storage. That's a significant amount of data. Most cities that we've watched our size that have implemented body cams are hiring anywhere from 1 to 2 people to manage that data. And from a context of loading and downloading, uploading that to the cloud, as well as data requests. And so that is a portion of what is coming. And I think Bukata Hayes said it great early on in June at one of the community marches. The body cameras keep the police accountable, but it doesn't stop them from killing Black men. And I think that's a reality that I think Mankato and every community continues to work with. And so I'm willing to make sure that we have the other tools in place. I'm very proud to say that we typically are well over the state mandated training for de-escalation. I believe it's 8 hours right now at the state. Mankato's at 24 per officer per year. And when it comes to mental health crisis intervention, we're at about 17 to 18 hours, and the state is 4. So, I mean, there's several things like that we have in place that we're already doing, that we're farther ahead in the game. We're not necessarily where we need to be as a community. But I want to have that conversation, not just on the council, but the community level of how do we take some of those dollars in public safety and continue to advocate for the public health pieces. Where do we work with the county more collaboratively on making sure that the human services are engaged in the process? And I know, for instance, earlier or mid-June, there was a person who was on the top of a building in Mankato downtown attempting to end life by going over the building. Our public safety people responded, but we also, as a matter of common practice for us, is we worked with the county health department because it was someone that they worked with on a regular basis. And again, everyone who was involved in that knew that person from that context. So we had the right resources in place to prevent a calamity. And I think, again, when you look at the national level, even at a Minneapolis level, it's incredibly tough to look at, but I know that we've made some progress already, and I'm confident we'll continue to move in that direction. How's that for a long-winded political answer?
That's why you keep getting reelected, Mike.
Yeah, just tire them out, tire them out.
I have a question for you, Mike. You know, you talked about your friend in Boulder,
Yes.
and I think she's moving to Washington now
That is correct.
to be a county administrator. What are the
Yes.
chances of her moving back to Minnesota?
Well, I have been her reference on her job application since she left for Boulder as an elected official. So I'm very aware of when and if she comes back to Mankato. So and when I was in San Antonio for that national convention, she was there speaking on racial equity and inclusive governing. And so I had a good time to chat with her quite a bit while I was there. And Tanya's a fantastic person, but I know she's making the decision she needs to make for herself and all the right reasons. And I wish her nothing but the best, whether it's here in Mankato or not. I mean, you want your friends and family to be successful in everything they do. So she's a servant leader, which is attractive to any community. So.
Yep. Other questions for Mike? We do have 4 minutes left.
Mike, is North Mankato looking at an ordinance like you're looking at for masks?
No, Dan, they, and I talked to Mayor Dean on the Juneteenth march. He and I walked for part of that together. He's got a bit better pace than I do, so I fell behind, but that's why he's the mayor. They're aware of what we're doing. And I don't mean this as a derogatory at all. In general, his comment was, we anticipate the state is going to have to step in at some point, and that may be true. I suspect as the data comes out from this holiday weekend, the governor has referred to masks. And I'm talking to the bar and restaurants in town, not just the ones that were closed recently because of outbreaks, but others in general. The state of Minnesota has been in Mankato doing some secret checks of process and procedures in the last 2 weeks very intensively. And so I suspect, and the consensus in the bar and restaurant folks is that the state may just shut them down again completely if this continues to happen. Minneapolis had an outbreak in some of their bars as well. I'll use an example. Most of us would probably go and sit down and have a drink with dinner, or maybe 3 drinks after work at happy hour, but we'd be doing it in a friend can roll there. But there's a few places in town that I'm familiar with, and it's been that way since I was in college, and it still is people go there, they don't sit at the tables and chairs, but they stand out in the middle of the bar, and they all stand in a herd and drink and talk and joke around, and they're shoulder to shoulder, and so on and so forth. Those places, establishments are going to struggle with this because they have to tell the patrons to sit down at tables. And that changes the dynamic and atmosphere of some of the places in town. But the reality is that we're seeing the outbreaks when everybody gets shoulder to shoulder. And I know I saw some photos from Okoboji this weekend where the boats are all tied together. And, those people do leave Okoboji because they're only there for the weekend. So the spreading won't necessarily happen in Okoboji proper, but I think that's going to come into play. North Mankato, they always need to be as their own city first and foremost, and just like we do. But I know they also pay attention to the regional context of what we're doing as well.
All right, that gets us to 12:59. Mike, thank you very much for being with us today. Hopefully you'll get to bed before midnight tonight. All right.
Yeah. Well, grab a popcorn, and get ready for tonight. You can view the meeting through the city's website, or you can go to the agenda links under the city council, and you can download not just the agenda, but also the Zoom link is there if you want to engage in the public forum. I know several people have already signed up to speak. We're going to give everybody, I think, 2, maybe 3 minutes at most. So the council will listen. I know as much as I've said what I've said, I do want to hear what people have to say. It helps me. And as simple as this survey was today that John ran out with a few things there, that does help formulate my decision-making process. So I do appreciate it greatly.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Talk to you all later.
I want to thank Bonnie and Dana for joining us today. Thanks for being our guests today. We enjoy having you here. Again, give it some thought to come and join us more permanently. That would be great. Anything else for the good of the order today before we sing our way out of here? If not, Doc, why don't you take us away when Kiwanis calls? Doc, can you unmute yourself? Doc. Hey, Doc. Well, that isn't quite working. All right. There we go.
When you are
call.
Sorry about that.
No problem. All right. That signals our end of the meeting for today. All right, thank you everybody for being on. We will see you next Monday. Have a great week. Again, thanks, Mike. See you soon.
Thanks.